All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I think we're just going to give a few more minutes to just let everyone get in, and then we will get the discussion started. Everybody grab your tea and get ready to have a lively discussion.
And for those coffee drinkers, grab a coffee.
Oh yes, and coffee. How could I forget?
I snuck in a coffee like 2 minutes beforehand. Cheers.
Nice. Cheers. All right, I think we can get started. People will keep trickling in, I'm sure, throughout the session. But I'd like us to get as much time as possible so that we can have these discussions and we can answer any questions. Just as an introduction, my name is Christian. I'm representing Legalese in this instance. I get the joy of also introducing these legal concepts, but operating as host. So I will also introduce our panelists as they speak for their sections. Josh is here from InfoDocs. And Peter is here from Iridium. InfoDocs is an innovative legal tech company that has over 40,000 clients. Iridium is an accounting and taxing consulting firm that has been named Xero's Partner of the Year, I think, right? This year. Hey, Peter?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Cool. All right. Well, now that we know who's who, let's get started, and I'll start us off with some legal. So let's just share here. All right, cool. So what are we actually here to do? All of you, I'm sure know, but let's remind everyone. What we want to talk about today is beneficial ownership, specifically the register laws, but actually what I'm here to introduce for you is kind of the concepts of these tricky terms and how they might play out. Just to give you a little kind of overview as to how we're going to structure today, I'm just going to give you the introduction as to what this law is and where it kind of came from, and then we'll discuss the concepts. I'm not trying to make you into a lawyer at the end of this. They are complex and the exercise is not always simple. But what I do want you to feel is confident with the concept somewhat, so that when Josh and Peter get to speak and kind of walk you through how this is being implemented and the practical effects of your businesses, you will at least have some kind of semblance as to what they're talking about with regards to that concept. Then Josh will give us a practical explanation and a demo, and Peter will discuss the changes with SARS and also a broader compliance discussion. And then we'd really like to wrap up with some Q&A. I have some questions for the panelists already that I'm kind of hoping they don't answer in their talk, because I really want us all to kind of bounce on and have that discussion. But I hope that you guys throughout the chat, get inspired to ask some questions. We'll navigate that through the Q&A of the Zoom app, and by the end of it, we'll try and answer everyone. If we don't answer, you're always welcome to email us afterwards. We may not have time, but let's see how we go. So where is the law? So it was important as a lawyer to point out that the law lives in the legislation, specifically with regards to this Amendment Act that has been assented to as of last year. What's the effect? Well, there's more than one effect, but the effect that we're going to focus on today specifically deals with the amendments to the Companies Act. And when has that effective date for that amendment come into life? 1 April. I realize we're in August. Don't freak out. As Josh and Peter will tell you, everyone is in the same position. We're all trying to figure this out as we go, and hopefully today we can give you some guidance as to how to do that. Freak out a little bit of freaking out is good. Cool, so let's talk about these fundamental legal concepts. The four that I really think are the most important with regards to this discussion, and specifically this amendment, deals with non-effective companies and affected companies, beneficial interests, and beneficial ownership. When it comes to affected versus non-affected, right? Everyone wants to hope that they're in the non-affected. The reality is all companies are affected by this amendment, right? But the way in which they categorize it is the level to which you must comply with these new requirements, right? So an affected company just has a higher or greater amount of compliance expected of them, whereas a non-affected is still affected by the amendment and has new requirements that they didn't have prior, but they don't have the same level. So if we talk about an affected company, it's a regulated company or private company that is controlled by or a subsidiary of a regulated company. To make things more complicated, regulated is an important term to understand, right? Within the concept of an affected company or a non-affected company, one must understand what makes them regulated. It isn't so simple. It includes a company if more than 10% of the issued shares in that company has been transferred within 24 months. You'll see here, I gave you little italics because, again, we have another concept which needs to be unpacked further, and that has to do with an affected transaction. This is not a simple exercise. There are definitions that are existent in the common law and in legislation with regards to what an affected transaction is. This is where you would definitely want to sit down with the circumstances and facts of your own situation with a professional and unpack it to see whether or not you would fall within regards to an affected transaction. But just to kind of give you an idea as to what affected companies might be in that regard. If, for instance, we now know that there is a greater level of required compliance than there is specifically for non-affected, what are the examples? So instead of scaring you with all of the examples, because there's quite a few, I'm just going to focus on the main one, which is kind of the register that we're going to be talking about, right? And it's the register of persons. The difference being that beneficial interest is kind of a focal point with regards to affected, and beneficial owners is a focal point with regards to non-affected companies. There are obviously various requirements, as I already mentioned, that don't live solely in the register, but have to do with forms and documentation that must be submitted to CIPC or the takeover regulation panel or the existing stakeholders with regards to affected companies. Again, these are instances where you would need to, with your circumstances of the facts of your business, speak with a professional to unpack whether or not you would be required to do so. So what is beneficial interest? I think beneficial interest is probably the easier one for us to understand, right? Because it just deals with a right or an entitlement that a person has through some type of vehicle, typically ownership, also agreements, to receive or participate in the distribution, right? So if we're talking about shares, that's quite an easy one there. To exercise or cause to be exercised, rights attaching to securities in a company, right? And to dispose or direct the disposition of company securities, right? In this instance, it's very clear who's that person, who has beneficial interest. That's right in front of us, not so much of a troublesome definition. When it comes to beneficial owner, this is where I think a lot of people are possibly kind of afraid as to how the net may include themselves or others. And what it's going to require is for you to, in the circumstances and facts of your own business and company, sit with these concepts and try to unpack or find some order in the chaos of all of this to see where it lies with regards to the compliance of your own business. So a beneficial owner is an individual who directly or indirectly owns the company or exercises affected control of the company. All right. Now, I've just given you 5 examples here. Holding beneficial interest goes back to what we're talking about, right? That is an individual who has beneficial ownership, right? The one who exercises or controls the exercise of voting rights, going to be another individual that has beneficial ownership. The ability to materially influence the management of that company. Now that's, what does that mean, right? How does that in application work? I think, I'm probably not alone on the panel where that inclusion is quite scary, right? The exercise of or control of the exercise of the right to appoint or remove members, also quite an interesting one. I mean, it could be simply relating to with regards to the shares and the rights associated with them as we know them to be participants in the appointments of board members. But as we know, that can also be varied in how the structure and mechanism for appointment may occur. And then finally, holding of beneficial interests in securities or the ability to exercise control through a chain of ownership or control of a holding company. Now, I know that I've spewed a lot of law, but that's my role with my lawyer hat on today, is to kind of give you the idea that there is nuance behind these concepts so that you can see that you may apply in multiple instances, multiple businesses might apply in different ways. And for us to have that understanding is the best way to first navigate how practically it gets implemented, right? So with that, I'm going to allow Josh to take the reins, and we can get on to what this means practically for you and your business. Josh, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christian. I think you wore the lawyer's hat very well there. Had the tone and the cadence right and everything. Yeah, like you said a couple times there, I think it's a little bit scary, but from the legislation that actually sets out the rules, there's a practical implementation that, as is the topic of today's discussion, at least is in the hands of the Companies and Intellectual Property Commission, the CIPC or CIPS, or they've got many nicknames. So I'm here to talk about how they are implementing it and to offer a practical solution for the vast majority of companies. So to start with just another quick introduction of InfoDocs. InfoDocs is an online company secretarial tool, is what we call it. Basically, we help you with your CIPC and general company compliance. We work with both business owners and professionals, such as Peter, who was actually one of our earliest customers and one of the most innovative partners that we work with. So we are working very closely with him on the changes and the new rules and requirements that are being introduced with beneficial ownership. And so, yeah, our focus is really on the 90% of companies that have a pretty straightforward share register, another tick box to tick off. And I'm going to show you just how to do that today. So yeah, I'm going to do a quick demo to give you an idea of how this works. And I'll start by just jumping onto our website here. So as Christian said there, we serve just shy of 40,000 companies, all South African companies. And what we're here to do is to help them make sure that their companies are compliant in the simplest and easiest way possible. So I'm going to go ahead and log into the app here. This is my portfolio of companies. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a slightly more complex company called Alphabet. And what I want to show you today is how this beneficial ownership register comes together and the types of resources that InfoDocs provides you with to meet this requirement. So I'm going to jump straight into the shareholders tab here, where you're going to see 4 different shareholders, right? The Amazon Trust, Google Incorporated, Nadia van der Heever, our support manager, and a parent company, which is just a useful name to try and illustrate how these tie together. But basically, we've got 4 shareholders, each holding an equal share in the company, 25% each. And that register that Christian was referring to earlier is basically going to pull from this information. So to give you kind of just a verbal introduction for how to capture this information, it's a very simple and straightforward process. Creating a shareholder on InfoDocs takes less than a minute and will automatically create the share certificates and the resolutions for you. And what you'll be left with is a nice, simple table like this, from which you can view the company registers. And in here, you'll find a bunch of different registers. The one we're going to look at today is the register of beneficial owners. And what I can do is start by just showing you the PDF version of this, right, which is a nice, simple document I say simple, it's pulling through the shareholders and the shareholders of the shareholders in order to give us an end picture of who the persons or individuals who ultimately control this company are, as Christian referred to. And in the case of a company like Google Inc. or a trust like Amazon Trust, we get a message here to say there's a missing share register or missing beneficiaries. Now, to give you a better idea, or to give you a good illustration of how this comes together, I want to show you the HTML version of this register. This is just the first version of a feature that I think we've got a long way to go on. But to give you an idea, this is an interactive diagram of the beneficial owners in Alphabet, right? And so this explains it, I think, a little bit clearer, right? We've got those 4 shareholders we saw earlier: Nadia, the individual, a parent company, which has some complexity going on here, Google Incorporated with the missing share register, and the Amazon Trust with the missing beneficiaries. Basically, I'm showing you this to give you a visual idea of how beneficial owners are calculated, right? So if we go back to that PDF register, we will see each of the people who ultimately make up the beneficial owners, which would be anyone holding 5% or more equity or ownership in the company in question. So through parent company holding 25%, we've got 2 individuals there, the parents, as you might say, who are holding just over 6% each. And through the grandparent company, you'll see the grandparents, for example, who are holding what ultimately makes up just over 6% ownership in Alphabet. All right, so this one's a little bit more complex. Most companies don't look like this. What I want to show you next is a company that's a little bit simpler, and show you just how to tick that box, right, in terms of CIPC compliance with beneficial ownership. So what we've done is we've added a key date for the beneficial ownership filing. Now, the dates are a little ambiguous, as Christian alluded to. The legislation was brought into effect on the 1st of April. I think CIPC had some initial deadline of like the 25th of May or something to get these things filed. No one met that deadline. I can tell you a very small handful of people managed to get their documents in order by then. And so the more general, the more realistic, and still just a working deadline for companies at this stage is the 1st of October, right, 2023. So that's the date that we're working with. We're working quite closely with CIPC to try and help them get as many beneficial ownership registers filed by then. And in order to help them with that, we've made it as simple and easy as we can. And so if we have a quick look at the shareholders here before we get into the process, this is much simpler, right? We've got like a very simple share register with 2 shareholders here, Josh and Chris. They each own 50%. And so when I go back to this dashboard here and I want to file the beneficial ownership, it's going to calculate that those are the 2 beneficial owners. They each own 50%. In terms of what information I need on them, I need their contact details, right? Their email address and phone number. This is specifically for CIPC. I'm going to be handing over to Peter soon, who's going to talk about SARS, who are a little stricter and have slightly more information that they require. So we're going to be helping Peter and all the other professionals and business owners to meet those requirements as well. But as far as CIPC is concerned, they want to know who the person is. And if there's a company that is a shareholder of yours, then they'll want to know the people behind that company. But once you've got those individuals captured on InfoDocs and you've got their contact details, they'll pull through to this page. And all I need to do is click next. It's then going to tell me that we need to submit this to CIPC. We're going to need a certified or verified ID for each of those beneficial owners. We need a resolution, which is effectively a mandate to lodge this beneficial ownership. And then they're going to want to see a register of the shareholders and a register of the beneficial owners in order to see how we calculated these beneficial owners that we're submitting. So just to give you a quick look at this resolution, these resolutions were originally drafted by Legalese. So we love to talk about our partnership with Legalese and brag about how great our resolutions are because of it. Very simple, concise English that has very strict references to the legislations that we're ticking all the legal, but also making it as accessible as possible. The next step would simply be to click submit to CIPC. We send you a copy of these documents to sign. We tell you where to send them. Once that's done, the process is over, right? Your beneficial ownership has been submitted. And for anyone who's already on InfoDocs and paying a subscription, this is another free service that we offer. So if you are being taken care of by a professional such as Peter, Peter is able to do this for his hundreds of clients and to kind of give them peace of mind that this new requirement has been dealt with. For anyone who has yet to work with someone like Peter, you can use InfoDocs for yourself, and the charge for the submission is 195 Rand. So less than 200 Rand. We're trying to make this as simple, easy, and affordable as possible. Yeah, and that's where I'm going to leave it. It's a very straightforward process as far as CIPC are concerned. When it comes to SARS and the tax side of things, it gets a little more complicated. And so that's where I'm going to hand back over to Peter to try to unpack the more complex implementation of this new legislation.
Yeah, thanks, Josh, and I appreciate it, and Christian. From my side, I'm coming in having to live this nightmare with our clients, and whenever something like this gets introduced, I don't only look at the legal side, but I also look at the practical implication for our clients. And you can imagine if a client didn't have to disclose their shareholding to the world or to anyone, and suddenly they have to start disclosing more information to government bodies. In my mind, that's a bit scary, and it's a big change, and people don't like change. So as a business, we're also having to go, how do we navigate this with our clients, and say to them, it's not just about filing something and moving on. It's also about educating them like we're doing now, and saying this is something that they can't get away from. It is a very real thing that we need to do, it is part of the law. And so when we're looking at this, it's also practically challenging to implement across a number of companies when there's a lot of missing information. And apologies if you can hear the background, but effectively, Josh went through an example where he said, "Oh, there's missing information here," and to get all that missing information all the way down, you may find that the trust or the company and the grandparent company, you don't have email addresses or phone numbers for those people because they just they invested way back when. So practically collecting all the information actually is challenging. So just make sure that when you're doing this, either for your own company or for a group of companies, that you're buffering enough time for this process. We're having to do this for a few hundred companies. We're having to put in a project plan for this whole thing in the background to make sure that we've got enough resources to implement this, and make sure that we're identifying all the gaps across all the companies that we're working with in order to meet this requirement for CIPC. The scary thing is, in amongst all of this, with CIPC and the grey listing coming in, SARS decided to change their income tax return. And it was literally 2 weeks ago, we were filing income tax returns, and they added another section to the income tax return that started asking for share register information. And I can vividly remember my tax person coming up and saying, hey, I filed something yesterday and now I've opened up the return and there's a new section. And now it's asking for all the shareholder information. But we actually don't have all the shareholder information because we never had to keep this information. So I'm just going to open up a document that effectively, well, was effective with SARS as of the 26th of June. And so this is significantly after the 1 April deadline that CIPC started. SARS decided to jump on the bandwagon, and it's not necessarily the same as beneficial ownership or interest. It talks about identifying people that hold 5% of a class of a share, and that you need to list a number of additional fields on the tax return for these people. Now, if you look at the CIPC requirement, it's definitely not this. This is significantly more stringent than what CIPC are asking. So now, once again, practically, you need to get all this information for a 5% shareholder. And if it's a company, you need to get additional information and a contact details for somebody at the company to note this on your tax return. And similarly, for a trust, there's additional details. So when we're looking at this, and there's other entity, I'm not quite sure what another entity is, but there's another entity. So when we practically were looking at this, going from not needing to disclose any of this information to SARS, suddenly opening up a tax return and saying, SARS want all this information. CIPC aren't necessarily talking to SARS. SARS aren't necessarily implementing this because of the grey listing, because this is different information. And from my side, I'm looking at this and saying, SARS are wanting to constantly improve their process and provide more transparency in their process and identify additional entities involved to make sure they're getting down and claiming the right amount of tax from the various parties. So I understand that they've introduced this. It's not necessarily perfectly tied to beneficial ownership or interest, because this is a different requirement. And I think it's easy to go, oh, well, this is just part of that thing that got introduced by CIPC, or that it's just beneficial ownership or interest, but it's not. It's slightly different. And I think it's just SARS's take on, well, we might as well jump on the bandwagon. And if CIPC are asking for information, why don't we just do the same? And it is frustrating for business owners and for accountants, because we've never needed to keep this information. So it is opening up a whole can of worms and trying to, for us to try and gather this information and store it somewhere, and to purely explain to the grandparents, individuals that a company way up here needs all your information. They've never needed to disclose that. So there's very real human elements to this conversation that I think are going to be very challenging. And this is a tax return right now that if you want to file your tax return and close out your tax return for the year, you have to have this all in place. So there is no 1 October deadline for this. This is if you want to be tax compliant for your 2020, or if you want to close out your 2023 tax return, you can't get away from doing this. So yeah, I think the biggest frustration that I've seen as a business owner and an accountant is the speed at which they're trying to implement things and the deadlines that they're putting in place without necessarily thinking through the impact that it's going to have on business owners and firms. And so I think if you're in one of either my position or as a business owner, I think you do need to be aware of these things. You do need to contact your accountants, understand more, read up about it, and realize that actually there's not a lot of guidance out there about this and about all the finer details. In Josh's example there, for a company that has 2 individuals, it's actually fairly simple. Where the nuances come in, where there's companies and trusts and additional companies, it becomes a lot harder to implement. So, where we're tackling this is one phase at a time. Let's deal with the simple companies first, and then move on to the more complicated, and move on to the trusts, because those are even more complicated. And I think, yes, there is this 1 October deadline, but there was a deadline before this. And I think you want to try and meet the deadline. It is important to try and meet that. But at the same time, sometimes it's not practical to meet every deadline. And also there's not a lot of guidance in this. So I think talking to people like Christian around, what can you do? How do I unpack this? What does it mean that I effectively control things? Because owning shares is simple. The rest of the requirements are a lot more vague. And I think what CIPC and SARS, or CIPC in particular, have tried to start doing is align the accounting treatment for ownership of companies, which doesn't purely talk to a percentage. When you're looking at, there are things like effective ownership and management that have slipped into the accounting treatment for groups of companies. And I think that's where they've got some of these definitions, is actually the accounting standards, and they're trying to mirror those accounting standards. I know as auditors and accountants, it is actually hard to properly understand what effective control is and how to practically implement these. So I think that's enough from my side in terms of unpacking things. I think it'd be great to dive into some practical questions around this.
Cool, thanks, Peter. I really appreciate the further discussion on what is happening and the questions as to why, and the ones that probably everyone here is holding themselves, to try and figure out and navigate the way through. I love the kind of mention of gray listing, and I think maybe let's talk about that to kind of ground why then this may have happened and why the law has been implemented. Do either of you want to discuss what gray listing is and why it may be relevant in this discussion?
Josh, you want to kick us off?
No, Peter, after you. Look, I have one comment on the grey listing, and it was mentioned to me from someone in the UK who said, I think the UK has been grey listed for the last couple decades or something. I'm not sure if that's the case, but they said grey listing is not the end of the world. It's not that important. Rather, the government are using this as a springboard from which to kind of spread awareness about these new requirements. But the new requirements, the new amendments were proposed long before the grey listing. It's part of a global trend. It's to increase transparency, increase accountability. It's to prevent things like state capture from happening again. I mean, it's a good thing ultimately. I know it's a pain, but hopefully with solutions like Infodocs and professionals like Peter, we're going to make this thing so simple and easy for you that next time CIPC ask for you to submit your updated register of beneficial owners, we'll already have all the information. It's not going to be any hassle of yours. And that's really where we're trying to go. Peter, I don't know if you have a little more technical, insight into the grey listing side of things.
Yeah, Josh, I'd like to say I'll throw a legal spin on it, but that's not me. That's definitely Christian. My understanding of it is similar to yours, Josh, in the sense that grey listing has impacted our economy. And people wanting to invest money in South Africa see this as a knock in their investment opportunity. So it knocks down how people perceive South Africa, that we have been grey listed, and it impacts the amount of money coming in from foreign sources. So people are less likely to invest in a country where they don't see transparency in how that money is going to be spent, and how money flows between companies. So this was saying, hey guys, we're uncertain about some of your practices in the country. You need to make things a little bit more transparent for the rest of the world. And they gave a list of things we need to do in order to make the rest of the world feel a bit more comfortable with how South Africa operates. And this is just part of that. And I think it's a good thing. And for most of us, it shouldn't be, oh no, I now need to disclose certain things. People are going to find out about stuff. Because if that's your first reaction, well, what are you hiding? And I think a lot of people are going, well, now I need to disclose my interest somewhere here. And well, yeah, okay. Are you scared that you're going to need to pay more tax because you own something that you're not declaring? And I can understand that, but that's part of, you should have been doing that anyway. So I think if you're a person who follows the law, this should be no issue for you. If you're trying to hide things, I can understand that maybe you're a bit concerned because it's making it harder to hide things. And well, that's kind of the point. They're trying to say, let's make things a bit more transparent, because you shouldn't need to be able to hide things, because that's kind of what happened with state capture and with entities getting tenders that actually the end result was that person was part of parliament, or somebody that was an uncle or an aunt or a brother of somebody who really shouldn't have got that. So it really is for the best interest of everyone for things to be more transparent. It's more about how this gets implemented, and that I think we're all concerned around.
Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier, people don't like change. And people reject it until they're forced to do it, and this is probably one of those instances where there isn't really anything to hide, but you hate it because it's new, and you hate it because it seems to be hard. Luckily, as you guys have explained, even despite the discussion of how these concepts can be confusing, maybe the systems that we can create can make it simple for people to navigate. So I see lots of questions are coming through. So I think instead of kind of going through these points that I had, I'm going to go through what everyone's asking and see if we can fit them in. So the first one we have has to do with beneficial register on InfoDocs. How does one amend the register to reflect the missing information? Josh.
Great question. Sorry, so I'm trying to answer as many questions via text here as I can in the background, but I've left this one because I wanted to speak to it. In terms of a company, either add that company or have the professional or the company secretary of that company add that company to InfoDocs, add that information, provide you with access, and it should pull through to your register. Relatively straightforward. For trusts, I'm afraid I have no simple answer just yet, other than it's coming soon. We are working on it as quickly as we can. I saw another question here about the Master's Office, expecting submission of beneficial owners. We did have a chat about this with the team to agree that trusts can be a topic for the next webinar, as they kind of come with their own can of worms. But yeah, to answer your question, Sayuri, that's how you would capture the missing information on InfoDocs.
Cool. Thanks, Josh.
Josh, I think for anyone that wants to have a chuckle, to go and take a look at the Master's website and try and just submit something, you'll have a laugh when you see a Google form pop up, and I think that's just how crazy this situation is.
I saw another question about can't the government systems speak to one another, and agreed. They are working towards this as best as they can, but it is very difficult for these government institutions to communicate with each other and to work together. Every additional kind of person in that supply chain slows things down. To be fair, the people at CIPC, they work in small teams. They've got some fairly good leadership in their management team, and so they try to keep the teams as small and quick as they can. But it is very difficult. They are working in that direction. I don't think a Google form is going to pull through onto CIPC, or SARS for that matter. But maybe one day.
Cool. I mean, I think also you'll notice that quite a few of these questions do relate to trusts. We're not the only ones here that are thinking, how are we going to navigate the issue of trust and how it may be applied here? I think what you'll find is through trial and error and through guidance, it will begin to develop a little bit more. So yeah, as Josh said, stay tuned. Maybe there'll be another one of these panels where we get to sit and discuss how that has unfolded in the near future. So let's talk about, there's a question that I saw here. So when they're missing information, right? Is that going to result in, for instance, non-compliance because we haven't sought out the missing information with, for instance, your example as Amazon? The access to that information may be impossible, difficult. What are the consequences, and what can we do to kind of curtail them?
So I've got one good example of this, a customer who contacted us in a bit of panic, saying the shareholder is a foreign company. I don't know what their share structure looks like. Getting it is going to be a nightmare. That information exists somewhere, but whether they're going to be able to get it and file it to CIPC in any reasonable amount of time is unlikely. That said, I did ask CIPC this question, and they gave me some vague answer about if it's a foreign company having a kind of registered or a local representative. I'm assuming that they're going to publish, something to shed light on that. But really, I don't know if I should liken it to this, but it's similar to Poppy in the sense that your job is to do your best to protect the information. I think, submitting your beneficial ownership, and don't take this as advice, but this is kind of how we do it. We, when there's a client with a situation like this, we will submit as much as we can to CIPC. We will be as transparent and upfront with them as we can. We will ask for clarity, for guidance. There are mechanisms to do that, and they are, relatively good at giving you some answer on the scenario. But then, if ever there's an issue, there's a paper trail of us doing our best to hand over what we can, and I think that will suffice and at least save any kind of what would you call this? Any situation where they blame you for not submitting anything at all. For example, someone else asked a great question here about a holding company with 28 subsidiaries. They all own less than 5%. That's a great question. I mentioned this one the other day because technically none of those are beneficial owners, right? So what would you submit? In that case, the CIPC website doesn't really accommodate that type of filing, but we would be, again, very proactive, very upfront, very transparent with them. This is the register of shareholder. As you can see, there is no one with significant control, beneficial ownership control. So how do you want us to proceed? And then they will guide us on that, and hopefully we'll be able to build all of those lessons into the app so that we can continue to serve more and more of the companies that are on the platform.
And Josh, I think you kind of raised a good point. I think I mentioned this to Christian earlier. When a law gets implemented, like during COVID, the C word, I know, we had a number of things that got implemented, and it was effective almost straight away. And you went, well, how do I practically implement this? There's a lot of nuances in this. Are there systems in place to file these things? UIF was a bit of a nightmare to try and deal with during COVID, and I think this is a similar situation of something's being implemented, and then you're going, oh, but what about this? What about that? And now all the nuances are coming out. And the people that implemented didn't necessarily have a playbook on that's 100 pages long saying, well, if this is your example, this is how you do it. And they're building that out with us. And I think sometimes people think that, when something gets implemented, all the answers are sitting in the background. And you just need to, if you don't submit according to the answer sheets, something's going to go wrong. But actually, that doesn't work out in the real life. There's a lot of uncertainty. And that's why we have lawyers to go, but what about this stuff, guys? Actually, and challenge the law and question what the nuances. And practically for us, it means that we need to go to the Christians of the world and go, actually, we don't fully understand this. How do we do this? And for Josh to go, that's a great point. I'm going to build that in to cover that nuance. And I think it's working with multiple parties to make sure that we're going towards the end result in the right way, rather than saying we have all the answers, because we don't.
I think that's a great point. I have to say, like, as your friendly risk-averse lawyer, to say like non-compliance because in practical places it doesn't implement that way is scary. But the reality is you limit that risk, because full non-compliance is obviously absolute risk. But you can limit that risk by attempting to comply to the best of your ability, like Josh said with regards to Poppy, and showing that while you are trying to adhere to the legislation, it's not actually working because of the circumstances of your company in that instance. And I like the idea of, us building a pathway forward alongside them. I hope that that's the case. I think if you participate with some regulators, it is a conversation, and with others, it sometimes is quite unilateral. All right, so we mentioned foreign companies. I think that's actually a topic that we haven't really discussed, right? What would be an instance, because I see a few people kind of discussing spaces where there is a foreigner involved. How is that going to be implemented? And is that something that we are currently catering to? Do we understand? Peter, Josh, either of you are welcome to jump in for the foreign company discussion.
Yeah, I'll jump in like very briefly on it. If a foreign company owns a local company and tries to open up a bank account, good luck telling a local bank that you're not going to tell them who the ultimate beneficial owners are, because actually, that just won't work. So, in order to actually open up a bank account, you actually need to disclose a whole lot of information, which is very much along the lines of what CIPC are actually asking for. And so if you've already got a bank, hey, that information kind of should be available because you've knocked on many doors and asked for the information. If you haven't stored that anywhere, hey, you're going to have to push harder. But at the end of the day, it is a requirement, so you do need to work towards it. And so it's hard, but it's not impossible to get. And you've probably had to get that information anyway in the past. I know I've had a number of foreign companies start operations in South Africa and open up a local branch. And to open a bank is very hard because of this beneficial kind of ownership thing that has only really come into CIPC's world, but in the banks space, it's kind of been there already. So yeah, that's kind of my practical thought on it. Josh, if you want to chip in, go ahead.
All I can say is that I have more to learn when it comes to the foreign companies. I think CIPC also have more to learn, or at least they need to figure out where to draw their lines and how strict they're going to be about this. I think if a foreign company has a majority stake in a South African company and can exercise significant control, then it's in everyone. It's in South Africa's best interest to know who those individuals controlling the foreign company are. I think if they're a minority shareholder, I think CIPC might consider being a little more lenient. Calling a company non-compliant for failing to produce the people behind a foreign company that might own 10% or less. I think might cause a lot of havoc for a lot of startups, for example, that have received funding from these types of organizations. But yeah, I just want to encourage anyone with these niche scenarios to either speak to the lawyers of legalese who can help you figure out exactly how to do this and do it very well and very professionally, or to send an email to support@infodocs. We can submit an inquiry to CIPC and get some clarity from their side. I think it's important to just clarify there, though, that working with the lawyers of legalese, you're going to get the correct requirements, the correct procedures from a legal perspective, which is the most important. Infodocs, we're able to help you tick the CIPC box, but ultimately you want to make sure that legally you are compliant. And I think consulting a professional lawyer in that case, one as calm and collected as Christian here, would be a really good idea. And would also help us, because by the time legalese come to us with the scenario, they'll be telling us what to do, and we'll be able to build that into the app and serve the next client with that type of issue.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, it's not always calm, right? With new laws being implemented. I think if I remember correctly, the implementation of Poppy was not a calm state of mind for a lot of people. And yeah, hopefully what we can do is with this space is the implementation of these requirements continue in kind of growing how we approach it for those niche ones, or at least how we understand how it gets implemented, right? When we talked about those concepts in the beginning, it was clear that sometimes those concepts themselves required further definitions within each of them, and that in itself creates very gray areas. I think we have a time for, let's say, 2 more questions. I'm
going to jump in quickly, just on a
go for it, Peter.
Looking through, I think there was somebody that raised the concept of getting IDs and passports was quite a massive issue. Getting certified ones is even harder, and if you're purely going by the law, that means that somebody's seen that passport and stamped that passport as certified. And now you're needing a whole lot of people's from potentially around the globe if you've got foreign entities or people overseas. They need to go and get stuff certified and send it across to you. Definitely is not an original certified, because you're going to send that in. So probably receiving that of an email is good enough, but that is hard. That's not a simple task. So we might gloss over things like, oh, just get a resolution or just get a certified ID. But as I said earlier, like some of these things are going to be practically really hard to get all the information. And so just being aware of what you need and starting this process as quickly as possible is really important.
I think also that's a great point, right? Like if you don't have any idea that this might be a requirement for you, you wouldn't know to start begging for, commissioned or, just copies of IDs that people somehow just take forever. At least in my experience, and I'm sure in both of yours, the experience of trying to get just someone's ID, much less get one that is certified, can be time-consuming and take its sweet time when you're trying to be compliant. The practical things that happen with regards to these requirements are always really important for us to understand. How CIPC understands it may be different, but hopefully through further implementation and repeated frustrations, they maybe, like you said, grow and learn alongside us. I would love to answer one more. Peter, Josh, is there anyone that you in particular want? Some of these kind of have been answered. I see they're talking about the information that's being included with regards to the SARS requirements. Those, as we have already said, differ from the ones that have been in CIPC. They kind of go further. Yeah, I mean, how about actually, this is how I want to end it, actually, I think. We've discussed the frustrations that this might cause. We've discussed the reality as to why it was brought about. Practically speaking, I think people understand what needs to happen and how. Do we think that this is bad or good? I know that that isn't really the easiest answer, because no one has a crystal ball, right? We can't really see how this is going to be implemented. Will it change our gray listing? But do we think it's a bad or good thing for small businesses? Or is this just going to be a grudge exercise? And that's how we can kind of leave.
Josh, go ahead.
No, there's just so many questions here. I'm trying to answer as many of them as I can. If I don't get your question, I'm sorry. Please send us an email. I will tell the support team to keep me looped into any of those, especially the more niche ones. I think that's where the biggest fear is right now. There was a financial service provider here who went through this process last year and is now having to do it again. I agree, it's a bit crazy. Let's put the questions to CIPC. Let's kind of hold them accountable to their implementation of the legislation. We go into those conversations feeling pretty confident with legalese at our backs, and they're very aware that we're all here to serve the customer. They do have a good attitude when it comes to that. SARS are a little meaner, not meaner, they're just a little stricter. But ultimately, I think being proactive with this, like everyone on this webinar is being, being transparent, and I think that's the attitude. At least let's ask them about the niche requirements, and just to re-emphasize, because I saw this come up a few times in the questions, that 1 October deadline, right? It's a vague date. It's not official. In fact, it was calculated by saying, okay, how about 6 months from date of implementation, being the 1st of April. So 6 months, we've got until October. But I think for the more niche scenarios, you're going to need more time than that. I know many big companies, many public companies that, struggle to get their annual returns filed every year, because it's not as simple as it seems for, an SME, for example. So that 1 October date is a working deadline, I would call it. It's also a guideline. So don't freak out too much, but let's get the balls rolling. Let's put the questions to CIPC. Let's put the questions to SARS, and let's work with them to help them implement this new legislation that is ultimately going to be beneficial for all of us, for South Africa. Cool.
Yeah, my 2 cents, similar to Josh, I think it is important to work towards things. Is there a fine if you don't? Hey, that's a great question to ask. No one did. But yeah, I'm not aware of a hard fine if you don't submit by 1 October. But I think it's important to try and stick to things regardless of if there's a fine or not, because, at least then you don't have to deal with it. So rather, implement things as quickly as you can, do what you can to work towards the deadlines, engage with financial professionals and legal professionals, tech professionals to help you navigate this challenge, and just keep learning what you can about this topic. There's lots of information coming out constantly, and more guidance coming out. So keep educating yourself.
Yeah, and for the, sorry to interrupt you again, Christian, there's just one great question. And for anyone who has educated themselves, they may have seen that CIPC are saying you must file this information with your annual return every year. I saw Sharif from BVSA also mentioned that piece of information. So legally speaking, this information should be submitted every time it changes, right? Within 10 days. I'm really hoping to automate that, right? If you capture your information on InfoDocs and you've already given us a resolution, a mandate to file, and you're on the subscription or you've paid for this or something like that, we'll make sure it gets filed automatically. Where the annual return deadline comes in or recurring deadline, I think CIPC have just use that as another opportunity to request this information, but they're not being so strict about it. There's certainly no hard stop. Again, there's just some confusion in the implementation here, but this question about filing it for now, I would try and get it filed by 1 October next year, or by 1 October, our goal is to have an automated solution for submitting updated beneficial ownership information as and when it's updated on InfoDocs. So hopefully by then I can tell you don't worry about it. And as far as the annual return is concerned, maybe they will start to request that we, like they do with some other information, verify that it remains how it was when we last submitted it. Again, we'll build a solution for that as they update their e-services.
Cool. Thanks for adding that. I think, yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of proactive approach. Often, I get to sit in a room typically as a lawyer in a reactive space where someone's having to deal with something having occurred because they had not done something. Everyone attending here and participating in this conversation is being proactive. I think that's positive. I think it bodes well for compliance and a better understanding of how this is going to be implemented. And hopefully with all of us being proactive throughout, those areas where there's still ambiguity become less so throughout time. So if we didn't answer your questions or you have further questions, please feel free to contact any of us. That information will be accessible to you if it isn't already in our follow-ups. Thanks so much for attending, and thank you, Josh and Peter, both for participating in the discussion. I think it was a good one. I think it gave some clarity and maybe scared some people, but maybe more encouraged them to be proactive.
Thanks very much, Christian.
Cool. Have a great day, everyone. Cheers.